When we think about space, we're thinking about power. The space of a social order is hiding in the order of space. French philosopher Henri Lefebvre explains in his 1974 work, The Production of Space, a book epigraphically opening with a poem, Envoy, by Mexican poet Octavio Paz. The short poem explores imprisonment and isolation and the constant sending forth of emotion despite no sign of reply. What might it mean to us to imagine writing as an emotional offering that is met with silence? How can we ensure that the things we carry into spaces of institutional power emerge luminously as the sacred substance of our stories? Making our stories matter within these spaces has long been a shared goal of the work we do as writing professionals in colleges and universities, which I will refer to broadly as academia, leaving off the halls out because, ew. Halls may be lovely, like a fine portrait that conveys stature. Hallways, even better. When we wander a hallway, we're in a space of possibility where we confront various interfaces and explore what might be. I'm here to talk about how auto-representation invites us to imagine what might be. Self-portraits have long served to capture, stage, and establish relationships in order to convey status, the status of the individual featured in relation to the constructed world as it appears in the image. While selfies by contemporary definitions are still relatively new and certainly exhibit distinctions from self-portraiture, they share with self-portraits the dynamics of capture, stage, and a readable desire to establish relationships. These shared aspects of the compositional practices of making self-portraits and selfies suggest pedagogical value. Teaching rhetorical knowledge and skill with regard for historical self-portraiture and selfies constellating together invites vital forebearers of critical and creative vision more space for guiding contemporary image work as it increasingly strives to resonate within and beyond classrooms as forms of art and civic media demanding social justice. While not all self-portraits nor all selfies are overly staged, most feature clearly determined decisions, even those that may happen very quickly, most recently due to the expediency of our digital tools. Liz Losh explains, the selfie's peculiar combination of humanizing self-portraiture and the futuristic gaze of a detached digital technical apparatus that senses rather than sees facilitates a complex media ecology of image-making and meaning-making practices. Loesch adds, a techno-feminist reconfiguration of the male gaze is critically emboldened by a deep appreciation for what such image practices may surface. She explains, the alienated attachment of the female gaze to everyday auto-representations made possible by mirrors, lenses, screens, and armatures could conceivably reconfigure the classic dynamic of men look/women appear from art history as different kinds of agency in image making. While we may debate the expansion of our agency as we capture, stage, and establish relationships through imagistic auto-representation, we may also appreciate potential to reorient our quantified selves through our captures and stagings. Loesch explains that while empowerment and discipline are related modalities that are strongly gendered around the selfie, it is important to resist overly simple emancipatory narratives that conflate use of a self-documenting technology with self-awareness. Indeed. And yet, I am trying to move into a space of potential in order to reflect upon Chicago artists who have been powerful, widely circulated, and seem capable of contributing to a range of resources that help us construct new ways of thinking about white language supremacy and just how we might be productively engaging in anti-racist pedagogies. I'm looking for a way in. Not necessarily physical, but calling attention to processes of interaction, especially within digitally mediated spaces, I appreciate Alexander Galloway's formation of interfaces for how it illuminates interfaces not as things, but as processes that affect a result of whatever kind. Interfaces themselves are effects in that they bring about transformations in material states. But at the same time, interfaces are themselves the effects of other things and thus tell the story of the larger forces that engender them. Galloway sees interfaces as enactments of incompatibility because the truth of social life as a whole is increasingly incompatible with its own expression. Culture emerges from this incompatibility. So, sure, let's not overinflate the emancipatory potential of auto representation that reorients us, even if for a moment captured in an image, but let's also consider the performative potential of such moments and how they seem to reorient selfie composers to the constructed world, to power. Instead, let's explore, because if we disallow this potential for image pleasure, for image being, if we foreclose on a moment in which a self, i.e., image, airs out and breathes, we deny the reality of emergent forces as they insist upon a more heady proclamation that swipes left on change and instead settles for, it's messy. It is messy, power, and how power shapes spaces and our experiences of them. How does this concept become materially relevant for the work we do and the work our field does in the world? How has it done so? What will it do now? What spaces invite us to move beyond text-based expliculations about power and move into more immediate, urgent, and effectively intense spaces for exploring power, gender, and race with our students and ourselves? Exploring visual rhetoric pedagogies for anti-racist work may offer effectively intense spaces for moving beyond text-based assertions about the messiness of power. For a few years, I've been exploring how selfies offer especially female selfie practitioners some sense of agency over their images, images that are strangely incompatible with reality, given stagings, lighting devices, at times near studio-level setups for capturing one's own image. This power seems somewhat wrought because in many ways our filters, lightings, and stagings may simply reproduce or approximate beauty standards that have overdetermined self-image, possibly esteem. I've argued that adopting a playful approach to using these tried conventions at the very least offers a behind-the-scenes working knowledge of, to put it crudely, how the beauty is made. And in this there is power, possibly passage to new levels of self-knowledge, self-esteem earned in the making and sharing of selfies and contemplation of selfie praxis. Selfies seem new-ish anymore, and the ubiquity of the tools and access to circulation potential amplifies awareness of what selfies may mean. But obviously, artists have long explored convention, subversion, and self-portraiture. I first encountered the infamous crucifix submerged in a urine-filled tank photograph, Piss Christ, at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, shortly after learning that I was born with one kidney and that it didn't look spectacular. The piece sent forth its critique, and I received it as a solemn promise of my well-being. Why else was this powerful image the first thing I saw upon entering this space? I went on to love renowned Hispanic artist Andres Serrano. His Nomad series emerged from the use of conventional studio features and techniques but were shot in street locations. Similarly, Serrano's Residents of New York and Denizens of Brussels exhibits chose not halls but hallways for exhibiting his work. The original Residents of New York series lived in the New York City subway station at Greenwich Village. Serrano's portraits sought to ennoble several homeless individuals in their self-portraits, using the conventions of portraiture to reclaim for them dignity and at the same time reveal them to the halls of high-profile art museums. The exhibits were always destined for MoMA. Almost as if taking on the apologetic tone some use to defend selfie praxis, Serrano explains, I think my work is very obvious. At least it is to me. All along these corridors we see residents of the city. Residents rather than homeless. Serrano's candor about his capturation, staging, and imagistic reorientation of meaning that ennobles rather than creates caricatures of residents of various streets refreshes and reminds us to pay attention. It's all happening. Especially relevant to the theme of this conference, Chicago artist Carrie Mae Weems is, for me, best known for her Kitchen Table series, and I became aware of it around the time I started reading bell hooks, whose clarity and grace got straight to her messages about art, feminism, power, race, and space. Tequila L. Hoskins explores a convergence between Weems and Hooks in her work The Black Female as Subject, Not an Object. Hoskins notes that Weems's Kitchen Table series was partially inspired by Laura Mulvey's essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which called attention to the absence of non-objectified representations of women in film and other cultural expressions. Weems also developed a desire to locate especially Black women in her portraits to offer space to begin to see more Black women represented as a subject rather than an object in visual culture. Hoskins explains, Weems uses her own image and a few actors in this series in order to question ideas about gender roles, the traditional family, relationships between men, women, and mother-children, the female perspective of family relationships, and also the longing to be an involved member of her community. She becomes the protagonist in this body of work as she makes an appearance in each image. The subjects in each photo are predominantly Black. This was done intentionally to challenge the usual routine of having white subjects as the main stage for general subjects to be explored in visual culture. For Hooks, by placing Black subjects in these universally familiar situations, Weems hopes to create an intimate connection between the subjects and the viewer that supersedes identifications of race and allows a non-white person to become the neutral figure for our reflection. I read these lines and see potential for pedagogical selfie praxis as a way of making space, of responding more routinely to the question we find in the brilliantly crafted space of the 2022 Four Cs Chair Stacey Perriman Clark's call for proposals, which insists on greater urgency for anti-racist work, and does so by asking about space with the seemingly simple question, why are we here? Perriman Clark situates her query by asking us to consider questions regarding the plan to hold our conference in Chicago. Thank God, I thought, and immediately began to wonder about how to respond to this vital question by asking brilliant Chicago artists who have held space for decades. Quickly, I was sure that Carrie Mae Weems would be a central voice and figure. But then almost as immediately, I worried I wouldn't handle her work in ways that best represented or ideally radiate what her works have meant, how they shape space, how they emerge as incompatible interfaces that resonate truth within spaces intended to explore complex, aesthetically engaging, and often uncomfortable truths, museums. Another Chicago artist quickly came to mind. I thought of Vivian Maier as a white female artist capable of creating some value for my precarious speculation. A balanced comparative look at two Chicago artists, Black and white, both of whom mean in complexly impossible and incompatible ways, reaching across difference to carve and arc, a new sort of interface that might illuminate how we interface differently, yet often desire similar ends. Truth, the messy truth of interfaces themselves, interfaces that articulate culture, cultures, and how we move within them, whether boldly and creatively or under cover of pretense, disguise, and secrecy. I stand with the decision to make the attempt I've just described, and were there time enough and space to indulge all the work I have to do to claim that such an effort could generate a response that serves Perriman Clark's question, why are we here? I would. But something happened. I was, and am, like many of you, living through various forms of trauma, and work-related challenges are at an all-time high. The clock was and is ticking, and I didn't have time to sort out the mystery of the reclusive white street photographer / European immigrant nanny who is Vivian Maier, and all that she might mean. And I didn't need to for the purposes of this moment and this presentation, because thankfully Carrie Mae Weems has been busy. As always, she's been busy making space for her work and for the works of other BIPOC artists. She's been busy creating symposia, talks, slams, making official museum spaces with the power she has accrued over decades of laboring to find and make space for her own work. While I was still considering my comparative piece, I began by exploring the spaces where we might easily find Weems and Maier. I examined how they appeared to the world, through what kinds of interfaces. Beginning from the perspective of Galloway's interfaces, the concept designed to capture how digital spaces act as meaningful culture-shaping portals of incompatibility, I began at their web portals, their main professional websites. What quickly stood out was the posthumously constructed nature of this Meyer site and the centering of images of the street, which were the subject of so many of her most beloved shots. Weems's site shines into view as a timeline, a literal history of her work, an official telling of her story. And while the standard of white museum walls deserves a lifetime of inquiry, they nevertheless have and still do represent the nature of museum interfaces where artists tell their stories to those who wander by, physically or virtually. Weems's site features many of her iconic photographs, series, and exhibitions as tiny thumbnails on a timeline moving horizontally through a large white expanse. An approximation of museum walls, a design convention, all white space. Of special note is the arrangement of Weems's images and story elements above the timeline, leaving an expanse of white space to fill the bottom half of the screen. While this arrangement suggests a black life immersed in white space, this placement also fashions a form of power by using the top-tier spaces for holding Weems's work, her stories, and her lifeline. These observations seem so simplistic as to be inessential to any serious inquiry. Thus, I was somewhat assured when I watched a Kendall Phillips taped interview of Carrie Mae Weems delivering her thoughts on creative activity as a human right, contemporary art as a call to act. Weems makes clear that my clunky black and white viz-red observations are not simply simple when she begins by discussing her long interest in architecture and how individuals are situated with regard to the constructed world, and how her work examines and rethinks these relationships. In 2014, she was selected to serve as the first African American to curate a solo exhibition at the Guggenheim. Shocked to know that she was the first, she decided to use her space in and around the museum exhibition to invite hundreds of other BIPOC artists to come and lecture, perform, and educate the museum about their presence and their work. Weems assures that the work of asking why are we here is no oversimplification of potential anti-racist work. She makes clear that wondering, how can I make and hold space for others with the power afforded me in these spaces, remains impactful and illuminating, more than a sending forth of emotion, but also a loving reply. Envoy. Imprisoned by four walls. To the north, the crystal of non-knowledge, a landscape to be invented. To the south, reflective memory. To the east, the mirror. To the west, stone and the song of silence. I wrote messages, but received no reply. Octavio Paz. How can studying Weems's self-portraiture, her contemplative pose around and within institutional spaces, and her ways of making space for others help us as we move toward increasingly anti-racist writing pedagogies? How can such studies and the activities they inspire move us beyond what hasn't much moved us against white language supremacy? And what will this shift look like? Can we begin to imagine these shifts through diverse compositional activities that invite more inclusive and culturally engaging praxis? Might we start with writing activities centered on sharing of, exploring, chatting over, and writing about selfies and other forms of auto-representation in ways that reshape and reconfigure our sense of the interfaces in which we live and work? I think and hope to explore this potential as one way of hoping to expose, critique, and reshape what Weems cites via Amiri Baraka, part of the Changing Saint. Thank you.